Anyway, we will be reading Hans Christian Andersen, classic fairy tales. Today, we will be getting to, let's see a bit of picture, the pretty, the pretty picture of the nightingale we read in the previous episode. Today, it's going to be the Elfin Hill. So let's bring up the Elfin Hill. I suppose it will be about elves. We shall see where the story takes us. Because these classic fairy tales, oh boy, sometimes they had a couple of them have already taken me through a loop. So the last one, the Nightingale, I really liked. The one before that, the Buckwheat, was kind of meh. The one before that, the Daisy, was just so poetic, my favorite so far. The one before that was the one I least liked. I don't even remember the name. That's how it goes. And today it will be Elfin Hill. Let's start reading, and hopefully the lighting keeps and the position keeps and everything keeps, and I can read without freaking distractions. All right. The Elfin Hill. Some large lizards were nimbly running about in the clefts of an old tree. They understood one another very well, for they all spoke the lizard language. "I wonder what is rumbling and rattling in yon old Elfin Hill," said the first lizard. "I have been unable to shut an eye for the last 2 nights, so great was the noise. It was just as bad as toothache, for that also prevents me from sleeping." "I am sure there is something on," said another lizard. "They had the top of the hill propped up on 4 red pillars until the cock crowed this morning. It must be well aired. The elfin girls have also learned new dances. Surely there is something on." "Yes," said a third lizard, "I have seen an earthworm of my acquaintance just when it came out of the hill, where it had been groping about in the ground day and night. It has heard a good deal. The unfortunate animal cannot see, but knows well enough how to wriggle about and listen. They expect visitors in the Elfin Hill, and very distinguished ones too. But whom the earthworm was willing or unable to tell me, all the will-o'-the-wisps are ordered to take part in a torchline procession, as it is called, the silver and gold, of which there is plenty in the hill, is polished and placed out in the moonlight." "Who may these visitors be?" asked all of the wizards. "What are they doing? Listen, how it hums and rumbles." No sooner had they said this than the Elfin Hill opened, and an old elfin girl, hollow at the back, came tripping out. She was the housekeeper of the old elfin king, and being distantly connected with the family, she wore an amber heart on her forehead. Her feet moved so nimbly. Trip, trip. Good gracious, how she could trip! She went straight down to the sea, to the night raven. "I have to invite you to the Elfin Hill for tonight," she said. "But you would do us a great favor if you would undertake the invitations. You ought to do something. As you do not entertain yourself, we expect some very distinguished friends, sorcerers, who can tell us something. That is why the old king of the elves wishes to show off." "Who is to be invited?" asked the night raven. "All the world may attend the grand ball, even the human beings, if they can talk in their sleep or know anything of the like which is according to our ways. But for the feast the company has to be strictly select. We only wish to have tip-top society. I have had an argument with the king, for in my opinion not even ghosts ought to be permitted. The merman and his daughters have to be invited first of all. Perhaps they may not like to come to dry land, but we shall provide them the stances. I think they will not refuse this time. Wait, I made a mistake, but we shall provide them with wet stones to sit on, or with something still better. And under these circumstances, I think they will not refuse this time. All the old demons of the first class, with tales such as goblins, we must invite, of course. Further, I think, we must not forget the grave pig, the death horse, not the church dwarf. They belong, it is true, to the clergy, who are not of our class, but that is only their vocations. They are our near relatives, and frequently call upon us. Croak, said a night raven, and flew off at once to invite the people. And then we have a few notes which are a bit harder to read. Let me get this closer. So elfin girls, according to popular superstition, are to be looked at only from one side, as they are supposed to be hollow, like a mask. When in former days a ghost appeared, the priest banished it into the earth. On the spot where this had happened, they drove a stake into the ground. At midnight there was suddenly a cry heard, "Let me go." The stake was then removed, and the banished ghost escaped in the shape of a raven with a hole in his left wing. This ghostly bird was called the night raven. To explain the night ravens. Finally, in Denmark, In Denmark, superstitious people believe that under every church a living horse or pig is buried. It is supposed that the ghost of the horse limps on 3 legs every night to some house where somebody is going to die. So there were a lot of references to other folklore and legends and whatnot. Let's carry on. The elfin girls were already dancing on the hill. They were wrapped in shawls made of mist and moonshine, which look very pretty to people who like things of this kind. The large hall in the center of the elfin hill was beautifully adorned. The floor had been washed with moonshine, while the walls had been polished with a salve prepared by witches, so that they shined like tulip leaves in the light. In the kitchen they were very busy. Frogs were roasting on the spit, dishes of snail skins with children's fingers and salads of mushroom seed, hemlock and mouse noses were preparing. There was beer of the marsh woman's make, sparkling wine of salt pepper from the grave vaults. All was very substantial food. The dessert consisted of rusty nails and glass from church windows. The old king of the elves had his golden crown polished with crushed slate pencil. It was the same as used by the first form, and indeed it is difficult for an elf king to obtain such slate pencils. In the bedroom, curtains were hung up and fastened with snail slime. There was a running, rumbling, and jostling everywhere. Ugh. Now let us perfume the place by burning horsehair and pig's bristles, and then I think I have done all I can, said the old elfin girl. Father dear, said the youngest daughter, may I now know who our distinguished guests will be? Well, I suppose I may tell you now, he said. 2 of my daughters must be prepared for marriage, for 2 will certainly be married. The old goblin of Norway, who lives in the old Dovre mountains and possesses many strong castles, built on the cliffs and the gold mine, which is much better than people think, will come down with his 2 sons, who are both looking out for a wife. Well, that was a long sentence. The old goblin is a genuine and honest, an old chap as Norway ever brought forth. He is merry and straightforward too. I have known him a very long time. We used to drink together, to our good friendship. He was last here to fetch his wife. She is dead now. She was a daughter of the king of the Chalk Hills near Moen. He took his wife on tick, as people say. Oh, how I am longing for the dear old goblin again. They say his sons are somewhat naughty and forward, but people may do them wrong by supposing that, and I think they will be all right when they grow older. Let me see that you can teach them good manners. When are they coming? Asked one of the daughters. That depends on wind and weather, replied the king of the elves. They travel economically. They will come when they have the chance to go by ship. I wish them to come through Sweden, but that was not to the old man's liking. He does not advance with time, and I do not like that at all. Just then, two will-o'-the-wisps came leaping in, the one much quicker than the other, and therefore one arrived first. Ah, that is such a redundant sentence, I would say. All right, let's keep going. They are coming! They are coming! They cried. Give me my crown and let me stand in the moonshine, said the elf king. The daughters raised their shawls and bowed to the ground. There stood the old goblin from Dover. He wore a crown of hardened ice and polished fir cones. He was wrapped in a bear skin and had large warm boots on. His sons, on the contrary, had nothing round their necks and no braces on their trousers, for they were strong men. Is that a hill? Asked the youngest of the boys, pointing to the elfin hill. We should call it the Hole in Norway. Boys, said the old man, you ought to know better. A hole goes in, a hill stands out. Have you no eyes in your heads? The only thing that struck them, they said, was that they were able to understand the language without any difficulty. Don't be so foolish, said the old goblin. People might think that you are still unfledged. Then they went into the elfin hill, where the distinguished visitors had assembled, and so quickly that it seemed as if the wind had blown them together. But everyone was nicely and well accommodated. The sea folk was at dinner in big water rubs. They said they felt quite at home. All showed very good breeding, except the two young goblins of the north, who put their legs on the table, for they imagined that they might take such liberties. Take your feet off the table, said the old goblin, and they obeyed, though reluctantly. They ticked their fair neighbors at table with fir cones, which they brought in their pockets. They took their boots off in order to be at ease, and gave them to the ladies to hold. But their father, the old Dover goblin, was quite different. He talked so well about the stately Norwegian rocks and of the waterfalls, which rushed down with a noise like thunder and the sound of an organ, forming white foam. He told of the salmon which leap against the rushing water when the wreck begins to play on the golden harp. He spoke of the fine moonlight winter nights when the sleigh bells are ringing and the young men skate with burning torches in their hands over the ice, which is so clear and transparent that they frighten the fishes under their feet. Whew. He could talk so well that those who listened to him saw all in reality. It was as if the sawmills were going, and as if servants and maids were singing and dancing. Suddenly the old goblin gave the old elfin girl a kiss, and it was a real kiss, and yet they were almost strangers to each other. After this, the elfin girls had to perform their dances, first in the ordinary way, and then with stamping of their feet, and it looked very well. Afterwards came the artistic and solo dance. Good gracious, how they threw their legs up! Nobody knew where they began or where they ended, nor which were the legs and which the arms. All were flying about like sawdust, and they turned so quickly round that the death horse and the grave pig became unwell and had to leave the room. "Hallo!" cried the old goblin. "That is a strange way of working about with the legs. But what do they know besides dancing, stretching the legs, and producing a whirlwind?" "That you shall soon see," said the Elf King, and called the youngest of his daughters. She was as nimble and bright as moonshine. She was indeed the finest looking of all the sisters. She took a white chip of wood into her mouth and disappeared instantly. That was her accomplishment. But the old goblin said he should not like his wife to possess such a power, and was sure his sons would be of the same opinion. The second could walk by her own side as if she had a shadow, while everybody knows that goblins never have a shadow. The third was quite different in her accomplishments. She had been apprenticed to the marsh woman in the brewery, and knew well how to lard elder tree logs with glowworms. "She will make a good housekeeper," said the old goblin, drinking her health with his eyes, as he did not wish to take anything more. Drinking her health with his eyes, as he did not wish to take anything more. Interesting way to phrase it. Now came the fourth, with a large harp to play upon. No sooner had she struck the first chord than all lifted up the left leg, for the goblin are left-legged, and when she touched the strings again, everyone had to do what she wished. "That is a dangerous person," said the old goblin, and his two sons went out of the hill, for now they had seen quite enough. "What does your next daughter know?" asked the old goblin. "I have learned to admire all that is Norwegian, and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest... Oh, there was the old goblin still speaking. I got bamboozled there. So the old goblin asked, "What does your next daughter know?" And then he says, "I have learned to admire all that is Norwegian, and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest of the sisters whispered into the old man's ear, "That is only because she heard in a Oh, I got bamboozled again. So my first interpretation was correct. The old goblin asked, "What does your next daughter know?" And the next daughter answers, "I have learned to admire all that is Norwegian, and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest of the sisters whispered into the old man's ear, "That is only because she has heard in a Norwegian song that when the world is destroyed through water, the Norwegian cliffs will remain standing like monuments. Therefore she wishes to go there, because she is so much afraid of being drowned." "Ho, ho, ho!" said the old goblin. "Is that really what she meant? But tell me, what can the seventh at last do?" "The sixth comes before the seventh," said the Elf King, for he could count, but the sixth was rather timid. "I can only tell people the truth," she said at last. "Nobody cares for me, and I am sufficiently occupied in making my shrouds." Okay. A young girl who can only tell the truth. That has gotta be rough on an old man. Now came the seventh and last. What could she do? Why, she could tell fairy tales, and as many as ever she wished. "Here are my 5 fingers," said the old goblin. "Tell me one for each of them." And she took him by the wrist, and he laughed so much that he was nearly choked. When she came to the ring finger, which had a golden ring upon it, as if it was aware that a betrothal should take place, the old goblin said, "Hold fast what you have. This hand is yours. I shall marry you myself." Then the elfin girl said that the tales of the ring finger and that of Peter Playman had yet to be told. "Those we shall hear in the winter," said the old goblin, "and also those of the birch tree, of the ghost's presence, and of the creaking frost. You shall relate all your stories, for nobody up there can tell stories well. And then we shall sit in the rooms of stone, where the pine logs are burning, and we shall drink mead out of the drinking horns of the old Norwegian kings. Rack has made me a present of a couple of them, and when we are sitting there, the mermaid will come to see us. She will sing to you all the songs of the shepherd girls in the mountains. We shall enjoy it very much. The salmon will leap up in the waterfalls against the stone walls, but they cannot come in. Indeed, life is very pleasant in dear old Norway. But where are my boys? Oops. Okay. Da-da-da-da. Where had they gone to? They were running about in the fields and blowing out the will-o'-the-wisps who had so kindly come to march in the torchlight procession. "What have you been doing?" asked the old goblin. "I have taken a new mother for you. Now you can each choose one of the aunts." Oof. Right, let's keep going. But the boys declared that they preferred to make speeches and drink. They had no wish to marry, and they began to make speeches, drank to other people's health, and emptied their glasses to the dregs. Afterwards, they took off their coats and placed themselves on the table to sleep, for they did not stand on ceremonies. But the old goblin danced with his young sweetheart about the room and exchanged boots with her, for that is more fashionable than exchanging rings. "The cock is crowing," cried the old elfin girl that did the housekeeping. "Now we must close the shutters, lest the sun burn us." Then the hill was closed up, but outside the lizards were running about in the cleft tree, and one said to the other, "I like the old Norwegian goblin very much." "I prefer the boy," said the earthworm, but the unfortunate animal could not see. Okay. What? What was the story? I'm. I prefer the boys, said the earthworm, the boys being the sons, but the unfortunate animal could not see. Lest the sun burn us. Then the hill was closed up, but outside the lizards were running about in the cleft tree, and one said to the other, "I like the old Norwegian goblin very much. I prefer the boy," said the earthworm. Okay. Well, of course the earthworm, but the unfortunate animal could not see. Of course the earthworm prefers the boys, since the boys were the ones doing the talking and speeches and drinking to other people and stuff. So the earthworm, who cannot see, would prefer the boys. Man, this is really a weird story. Okay, let me switch up to begin the discussion portion of this stream. All right, so I don't know about you, but this is a really weird one. Hold on, let me mark up. Oh, the next story is the saucy boy. All right. First of all, it's again funny to see the different generation of writing style. I don't think you would find today on a children's story the sentence "the cock is crowing." I think people would write the rooster, but maybe the word, the use of the word cock rather than rooster is more chirurgical than we might be willing to believe. Then there's the old goblin just taking one of the girls for a wife and telling his nephews to take sisters for, and he just, "Hey, I've picked a wife, now you pick your aunts." "I picked your new mother, now you pick your aunts." Like, That is crazy. But the entire story seems to be completely and simply a fantastical exploration of lore. It seems to be. I really don't think there's any specific morals or lessons that the writer is trying to portray. I think in this story, he was simply writing. This really does feel like a story that the writer had fun with, and that was it. And I personally didn't like the writing style that much. A lot of very long sentences, huge dialogues. There's at least three dialogues that went on for half a page, which is ridiculous in a fairy tale that has three, well, 4 pages, right? One, two, three, four, okay, five, 5.5. Fairy tale that has 5.5 pages, and we are met with at least three dialogues that last half a page. That is way long for dialogues, and the run-on sentences were ridiculous. The descriptions, some of the descriptions were redundant. It was no longer a poetic follow-up to an already poetic metaphor to illustrate an emotion or something of the like. But what seems to me is the writer was having fun with these folklore, literally folk space lore. It was having fun with elves and goblins and thinking about them. What I think is most interesting about the story is exactly the portrayal of these things, where elves are elfins and they are nothing like the elves of that we think of today with the pointy ears, tall, blonde, etc. Even though they're still Nordic. So funny enough, they do have that source in terms of aspect. But the elves are nothing like that. So they're hollow. They're demon creatures very clearly. They're demon creatures. The way they talk, the way they make their plans, the food that they prepare, pretty much demons. And the goblins, which nowadays are always tiny little creatures, the weakest of monsters, normally the most mindless, they're actually described as normal men. That was also interesting. And the way it described the hill opens up and closes down, and is it the hole, is it not? So it seemed to me like the writer was playing around with the folklore and that he was using folklore that was already established. Hence the writer's notes. I don't know if that's from the book or not. I'm not researching anything. I'm just using my understanding of storytelling to tell you that I'm pretty sure that the writer did not have a goal with the story, unlike the other stories that we've read so far, except for the one that I didn't like. This one is not trying to give any message. The only thing I would look into would be the choice of a wife. You know, where he chooses the wife that tells fairy tales, essentially, and then draws this picture of poetic love around her telling fairy tales. So, you know, a fairy tale writer kind of admiring his own craft and writing for his own peers, most likely. I was surprised that that's. I was surprised that he didn't do a turn on the sixth daughter. The sixth daughter is the one that's very timid, and she just says, "I can only tell the truth, and I always tell the truth. Nobody likes me. Don't mind me. I'm just working on my shroud." And then the story actually went. All right, so the seventh came forth and said that she reads fairy tales. So the sixth daughter shows up and like, oh, I'm very honest, I'm very authentic. Don't mind me. Nobody likes me. Just move on. And the story actually just moves on. Nobody ever talks about her or mentions her again. Like that is so odd. The way that character was introduced and appeared, I really thought there was going to be a turn involving her somewhere, because they make a point of writing that the king, the Goblin King, asks for the seventh straight up, and then the Elf King is like, "Oh, I know how to count, and we're going to the sixth actually." Then the Goblin King goes, "Oh, okay, so the sixth. What's up with the sixth?" And the sixth says that she's honest, sincere. I only tell the truth. Nobody likes me. Move on. I'm just working on my shroud. And they actually just move on and forget all about her and never mention her again. Because of the way she was introduced, an on-scene, I'm forgetting the term, foreshadow. A foreshadow that immediately gets revealed, right? Um, and then they do nothing with her. Very odd, the way they presented her. Because the way they present these daughters, where each one has a quirk, and the king is starts to reply to each of them, and then he just stops after the fourth. The fifth is like, "Oh, I want to live in Norwegian because otherwise I want to survive when the waters come and sink the world." And the king's reaction is, "Ha ha ha! Is that really why? That's funny." So what does the seventh say? There's no seventh. Actually, we're going on the sixth. Then will be the seventh. Oh, okay. What does the sixth say? "I only tell the truth. Nobody likes me. I'm just working on my shroud." Okay, so what does the seventh say? "I tell fairy tales." Ah, that is wonderful. My favorite thing in the world, telling fairy tales. Oh, ho, ho. Please tell me. So, I don't like when a writer goes to the trouble of coming up with picturesque ideas, plot lines, let's say, plot points, not plot points, but apparent plot points, let's call it like that, and then they go nowhere and they do nothing with them when they could actually be interesting or they could actually have been worked upon. And I will be honest, the worm and the lizard and the way it ends, I don't know if the writer is just trolling the reader. You know, this is presumably the same author of The Emperor's New Clothes, so I wonder if this is a story of that is like meta, telling the story of The Emperor's New Clothes. So basically, a nonsense story without any message, without any logic. It creates the appearance of meaning with the daughters, with the structure, with the characters, the way it starts, the way it ends consistently. You know, it ends with the same characters that it starts. All of this stuff, but then it's actually just, there's no point. And nobody will say there's no point because the writer is badass and he's got a lot of really popular stories and tales. So my money would be on that. The writer is just trolling, and whatever meaning I could derive from the story, it is simply being derived out of the attempt to find meaning, the struggle and effort to find meaning, and not because the writer actually put meaning into the story. That would be my take. It's a troll. It's a troll story. He's using researched folklore. Again, folk, space lore. He researched some folk lore. He made a story about the characters. He filled it with elements, with fairy tale elements that give the impression of the usual kind of plot threads and messages and lessons that you would expect out of a story. And then he's laughing his butt off as people make up stuff that he never meant to say or he never meant to put into a story that is essentially just nonsense. Fun nonsense, very imaginative nonsense. The description of the meals and all the foods and the description of the party I thought was very creative, very imaginative. But yeah, I wouldn't give this story much props or much importance, to be honest. That is just my take. I think the writer is trolling. I would love to hear otherwise. If there is really some meaning that makes sense, I would love to know what it is. But not enough to go research people who got paid to say so. But if you, random, has who has as many credentials as I am to make statements about literature and the history of fairy tales and all of that stuff, if you have an input, I would love to hear it. Thank you for listening. I hope you liked it. I hope you like my take that it's a troll story. After explaining and articulating it, I really believe it. All right, this is Cuscopia. Thank you very much for listening. This was a pleasure as always. I'm signing out. Take care.